So I saw a post go by the other day. In fact, I think it was pretty much yesterday, where it was quite clear that something had upset the paedophile president of the dying empire. They said this is the maddest that he's ever been, and it is to do with a 250th anniversary of the dying empire, of which he is the emperor. And they had basically, from what I understand being what Conrad just told me right before the show, is that they had essentially not really been entirely honest with some of the artists who were going to perform at this particular Trump-sponsored event, Trump administration 250th celebration. And when they found out, of the 12 of them, 9 have dropped out, and they're not going to perform at the thing. And the Truth Social post that Trump did when he found this out is extremely funny. It's extremely funnier when you realize the actual reality that Trump does, I think, sometimes just go on his phone and post like a normal person. Yeah. But generally speaking, when it is like a big announcement post, he has a guy write the post for him. He dictates it to him. Right. Oh. So he doesn't just dictate like the words. He says like, make sure that bit's in capital letters. Like he's like, make sure boats is in capital letters. Yeah. The boats. So here's what he said. I understand artists are getting the yips about having to do with their performance on Wednesday, so I'm thinking about bringing the #1 attraction anywhere in the world, the man who gets much larger audiences than Elvis in his prime, and he does so without a guitar, the man who loves our country more than anyone else, and the man who some say is the greatest president in history, the GOAT, in brackets, all capital letters, the GOAT, Donald J. Trump, to take the place of these highly paid, third-rate, in quotes, artists, and give a major speech rallying the country forward like I have done ever since being president. 2 years ago, the United States was dead. Now we have the hottest country anywhere in the world. I don't want so-called artists, in quotes, that get paid far too much money who aren't happy. I only want to be surrounded by happy people, smart people, successful people, and people who know how to win. So by copy of this truth, in all caps, I am ordering my representatives to look at the feasibility of doing an, all caps, America is back rally on Wednesday, Washington, D.C., same time, same location, only great patriots invited. It will be a wild and beautiful celebration of America. President Donald J. Trump.
Oh, man. It's good. It's so funny. Because wasn't it recently they did that, they tried to do that like non-woke fucking event where it was like Kid Rock and a bunch of others, and it was like the worst fucking thing you've ever seen. Yeah, the halftime special. Yeah, but it's like, like these attempts, like I think like they know that they've lost the kind of like musical and cultural kind of I don't know, like they've lost that part of America, and it is kind of amazing. I wonder if anything similarly happened back, to like George W. Bush or anything like that back in the day. Because I know
I thought you were going to say Hitler.
Oh, yeah. But I feel like, is there an American precedent for like this kind of thing? Because I know that, like there was a lot of protest music going on at the time, which I probably would say there really isn't as much these days.
No.
But yeah, like I wonder, is he, is he the first one to really kind of get this reaction?
Yeah, he's got to be, because I think it's interesting. Like you do bring up a good point about the George W. Bush era, because like the Iraq War was like, it wasn't as unpopular as the Iran War. It wasn't as popular as Vietnam. I think that it probably, was am I saying popular? It wasn't as unpopular as Vietnam. It wasn't as unpopular as the Iran War. I think it was about the
Mhm.
same as popular, maybe a bit more popular than the Gulf War, right?
Yeah.
And obviously you had like, there's the tune that everybody remembers, I think, is like Mosh by Eminem. Where he's spitting and saying like, strap George Bush with an AK, sent him to the front lines, yada yada yada. It was just like a
Oh
big
yeah. I was
anti-war
thinking,
thing,
yeah, the
yeah.
ones that I always think of are like like there was like Green Day and fucking Nine Inch Nails and like a
Yeah.
lot of these groups were being super explicit. Like I remember there was like it was like some music awards. Nine Inch Nails wanted to do a performance, and their backdrop was supposed to just be a picture of George W. Bush, like not edited crazy or anything like that. And they turned him down. They were like, "Oh, you absolutely can't do that." And he was like, "Okay, well, obviously they've decided that his image is as offensive as I find it." But he did like a couple albums about George Bush in America and all
Oh
that kind of
yeah, a
stuff.
thousand percent. Yeah,
Whereas,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, like I feel like we're getting a lot of stuff that is like expressing political discontent, but not so much stuff that is like directly aimed at like Trump and his administration or whatever.
No, we got that one shit Bruce Springsteen song about
Yeah,
Minnesota.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
garbage.
And I mean, there's
No,
like
it's just not
we're
my vibe.
getting
It's just not my vibe. Yeah,
the Macklemore song about Palestine, but then it's like that's aimed at
that's
Palestine as
Palestine. He wrote
opposed
that
to
while
yeah.
Biden was in office, right? Or maybe
Oh, did he? Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I
probably.
think so. I can't.
Mm.
Yeah, I can't quite remember. Hins Hall is what the tune's called, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, I think that was during Biden because like that shit happened like quite early on into
Yeah, it might
the
have. Yeah,
genocide, I
yeah.
think.
Mm.
Yeah. Not sure.
But yeah,
Yeah.
crazy. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
so
a
now
good
they're just
point.
gonna have this fucking convention of real American patriots. Like I love that. Like only the real American patriots are invited
Yeah,
because it's
you
kind of
can't
funny because
come.
it's like they put on this event and they were like, oh well, we'll try inviting the non-patriots first, and if they turn us down, then we'll go for the patriots.
Oh, it's great. It's really good stuff. Welcome everybody to Red Planet. It's Red Planet. We're going to start the show the same way that we do every single time by saying, Tim, what's the most base thing you've done over the last couple of weeks?
Well, yeah. So just the other day, there was a little bit of a rally, another Palestine related one, but this one was with um one of the speakers was one of the guys who just got back from being held captive by the IDF um, for being a part of the global Samud flotilla. Guy Hahona Ormsby, who you might have seen on social media talking about his treatment and his abuse and torture at the hands of the IDF, which we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later. So he came and spoke to everyone about uh, how he was treated. Also, my good friend Kyle, who New Zealand followers of Red Planet will probably also know as one of the guys behind the One of 200 politics podcast. He spoke there as well. And there's a couple of others as well. But I think the moment recently with Hahuna coming back and speaking about his condition, I think has been a very big point for a lot of people over here who are still choosing to kind of like, like ignore what is happening over there. Because he's obviously a local guy and he's very like, he's not like a influencer or any type like that. He's just this Maori father, like real kind of like dad kind of dude. Not super like he doesn't appear like the stereotype of like like the young activist or anything like that. He's a Maori dude. He's pretty relatable to a lot of normal kind of like I guess that salt of the earth kind of New Zealanders. There are a lot of people that have been like obviously racist about him having like full facial moko and stuff like that. But in general, like a lot of people are just like, oh man, actually no, he's just like a normal dude that obviously saw this injustice and took part or whatever. Like he hasn't particularly been involved in a lot of activism in the past or anything like that. But yeah, so I think it's really good to have people like him getting involved and kind of like I mean it is this difficult thing because it's kind of like our current government, I don't think under any amount of political pressure would actually do anything meaningful. They've started to do things like sanction Benkover and all that kind of stuff, but it's like, like that's like on an individual guy who's probably never been here, never going to come here.
Literally, yeah. What's the point?
Okay, so yeah, I think we need to be like cutting all trade, expelling the fucking. Actually, I don't even know if the ambassador is still here, but he was for a long time. But yeah, so that was really good. That was, I would say, a reinvigoration of the local pro-Palestine movement, because some of the rallies kind of have been shrinking a little bit. But yeah, no, that was really good. What about yourself, Neil?
Yeah, so I have been doing a bit of scheming on what I've got next in terms of organizing. I am, of course, doing a little bit of chair work with that abolitionist organization I was telling you and the listeners about a couple of weeks ago. So still got some ongoing organizing with that, just kind of like, building an organization, giving it the sort of the bones of the organization kind of thing, creating a foundation and what have you. That's very exciting and very privileged to be part of that and, participate towards it. So that's really good. And yeah, it has been a kind of, other than that, just kind of pondering quietly, trying to figure out like what my next move is, because, housing is my, my main major thing. I'm not the chair of GMTU anymore, and I'm wondering like where my energy can go with that. And I have been thinking about a couple of different options. There are a couple of different organizations that do little bits and pieces that I could be contributing towards. So I'm gonna give some people a call and email and stuff, and see what people are thinking this week in terms of like what they need help with. I have also been thinking about organizing my own building. We have like a really interesting situation in the building. Like the building is owned by a property management company, and then you get people who buy the flats inside, but you're basically just a leaseholder. And then even those leaseholders, like they can become, you can be a landlord with the leasehold, that you have with the flat or whatever. So there is a mix of residents who don't really have that much control over the building unless they are in the sort of like directors committee, and like not every resident is in the director committee if like even if they own their own home. And of course they don't technically own it. You can still be evicted from the building if you like don't abide by the terms of the lease, essentially, which is just like it's a fascinating reality. Like these people just don't own their own homes, and I'm just sat here like as a renter going like, I know the way that some of these people have spoken to me in the past when we've had like a bit of conflict and stuff. Like one of my friends had his dog in the garden, and this fucking dickhead came downstairs and was like, "You can't have dogs in here," and I was just like, "Who says?" And he was like, "You are," and I was just like, "Get out of my face, you fucking dickhead." And he was like, "Do you own your own home?" And I was like, "It's none of your business, but I don't." And he was like, "Right, well, I'll be speaking to your landlord." And it's like, "Oh, okay." like, first of all, you have no idea who my landlord is, right? So that's the end of that. Secondly, that's the level of power that these cunts try and fucking exercise over you when they realize that like, oh, you don't have a lease. But it's like, so it's extremely funny that like, you could get evicted for doing insane things. Like there's bits in the lease where you can like literally be expunged from your fucking house. I don't even know if you get your money back if you'd be able to sell it or whatever. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, it's very funny. But because of that, because of like understanding the nature of it, it has made me think like, there's already a building WhatsApp group. It's, pretty apolitical. It's just people talking about, the comings and goings of maintenance and stuff like that, like, oh, I've got a leak in my flat or whatever, this, that, and the other. So I was just kind of thinking like it might be worth me, putting a little notice in there or like printing some stuff off and saying, let's have a meeting, like just start with one of the buildings first, and then like, move on to the next building if we like meet someone from the next building and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I would be lying a little bit if I said I haven't been inspired by Soph, because I know that Soph is doing a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
organizing on her estate at the minute.
I was literally just gonna say that yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's really exciting stuff what Sophie's doing, and I can't wait for her to update Red Planet on all of it. But it's very exciting stuff. And yeah, so I'm just kind of like a tiny bit of a crossroads, but I am in fact still doing little bits and pieces. So yeah, watch this space, and I'm sure I'll have something a bit more excited to tell you about in a couple of weeks' time. But of course, as always, we want you to help us flesh out this segment. We want to know what base things you've been doing. You can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. Or send an email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you're cool with that, and we may shout it out in a later episode. But for now, we're going to move on to the news. And because we weren't here last week, we are going to be covering some bits that happened the week before last. So apologies if there aren't things in here contemporary enough to satisfy your news needs, but it is what it is. Tim, why don't you hit us up with the first one about the Global Sunward Flotilla?
Yeah, so related to what I was just talking about a minute ago. So we covered, I think, on our last episode that a bunch of the Sunward Flotilla activists, these were all the activists that were going by boat to get to Gaza to breach the blockade. They were detained by Israel and that they had been in custody for a little while. And so about I think just over a week ago now, they started to release a lot of them because they can't hold them forever being non-Palestinians. Israel actually has to kind of like appease these other governments by not holding their citizens indefinitely. So Israel says it has deported all 430 plus foreign activists from the Gaza-bound flotilla, with Turkey sending charter flights to repatriate 85 Turkish citizens and participants from other countries. Activists from Egypt and Jordan were transferred to their respective borders, and amongst the 6 Irish citizens aboard was Dr. Margaret Connolly, the sister of Irish President Catherine Connolly. 3 New Zealanders were involved, and even evil, ghoulish cuck of a man, our Foreign Minister Winston Peters has condemned Bengavir's actions, saying that it vindicates New Zealand's decision to put a travel ban on him, which is what we were talking about earlier. The odds of him coming down here, not likely. Although, if you have seen the map of where the map of the world where it shows you what countries are in danger of Israel's nukes, New Zealand is conveniently outside of that. Just that's a pro tip. That's a sneaky little thing that might help us all in the future. Organizers of the Gaza Aid Flotilla are saying that activists released from Israeli custody were seriously abused, including at least 15 people reporting sexual assaults, some of them rape. Several were hospitalized with broken bones and injuries from rubber bullets fired at close range. So that's what we're talking about earlier with Hahona Ormsby. He was one of these people that came out saying this. There's recently been another video of an Australian activist on the boat who is describing her own sexual abuse by the IDF. So Israel's prison service has predictably denied the allegations, calling them false and entirely without factual basis. But Italian and German authorities have both confirmed their nationals were injured, with Italian prosecutors now investigating possible crimes, including kidnapping, torture, and sexual assault. One Italian activist, Luca Poggi, described being stripped, thrown to the ground, kicked, tasered, and having some fellow detainees sexually assaulted, all while being denied access to a lawyer. A French organizer said 5 French participants were hospitalized in Turkey with broken ribs or fractured vertebrae. Spanish police arrested 4 global Samud flotilla activists at Bilbao airport after clashes broke out when members of the Spanish delegation returned from Turkey. Footage shows officers dragging activists across the terminal floor and whacking them with batons. It's a pretty brutal video, and I think this shocked a lot of people. I even saw a lot of Zionists being like, this isn't Israel, this isn't the IDF, this was Spanish police. I think even Israel was like, oh well, we're gonna have a chat to them about why they felt they needed to, just like shit like that, where it's like, well, I wonder why they're doing that. I wonder who gave them that idea. But yeah, this comes after Israeli Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir posted a video mocking activists being pinned down in prison, which sparked international outrage. So this was a wild video to see, and I think it also was one of those things where, so Ben-Gvir posted it himself, like Israel posted this video, and I think they didn't realize, how there's stuff that Israel posts for themselves, and then there's things that they post for the rest of the world. And I think this was a huge miscalculation on their part, because I think they were going to be like, oh, we're going to go in here and show that it's all these like soft activists from around the world, and they're just, like they have this narrative that it's like these like spoiled little activist kids, and they're going to be crying and we're going to laugh at them and send them home. And instead it's like this wild video where they're all like handcuffed, they're all on the ground, there's guards all around them, and he's like laughing in their faces and yelling at them and all this kind of stuff. And it's very like, it's the most deranged thing. If Paul Verhoeven put it in RoboCop, you would be like, this is on the nose for Paul Verhoeven, this is too much. But they posted themselves, and and I think it's one of those things where even Zionists haven't really been able to satisfy themselves on that one. They get to that point where they go, okay, well, yeah, he's just a bad guy, he's a fringe guy, we just need to replace him. And it's like, well, like he's a product of Israel. He's like, he may be a bad guy, but we're talking about the bad guy factory here. So yeah, so Italy is now pushing European Union partners to slap sanctions on Gvir himself. The organizers are making the point that while the world is focused on their suffering, this is just a glimpse of the brutality that Israel inflicts daily on Palestinian prisoners. Everything alleged by the activists or shown in Ben-Gvir's video is the same as what we've heard and seen time and time again from Palestinians. The double standard is both horrifying and a core part of the Samud strategy. It's much harder for the world to turn a blind eye when the targets of Israel's violence are people from our own nations in the imperial court. Italy, Ireland, and Spain are calling for EU sanctions on Ben-Gvir, and the UK has summoned Israel's top diplomat over the inflammatory video, which is another, I think, interesting thing where it's considered an inflammatory video as opposed to like these horrific acts or anything like that. It's like, oh, this video is like so inflammatory when people actually see what is happening, which obviously is pretty wild. But yeah, so that's what's happened there. Obviously more people have been coming out with their experiences since then, like like the New Zealanders and also like the Australians, and I think we're going to see more of this come out as these activists are actually preparing their legal cases against the IDF. And we'll see how that develops. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is going on in Kenya?
Yeah, so as I say earlier, this was news from a couple of weeks ago. There could be some developments that I am missing out on here, so apologies for that in advance. But this was about the transport strike and fuel protests in Kenya about a week and a half ago. So more consequences of the massively costly war against Iran are becoming apparent in Kenya as tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets last week to protest the price of petrol rising by 20%, with transport unions demanding the price be decreased to 35%, as it was decreased by 35% as it was already too expensive before the price rise. Everyday Kenyans joined in solidarity protests in Nairobi and Mombasa as the public transport workers went on strike across the nation, with police agitating the crowds and encouraging pushback to their violence. 4 Kenyans that we know of so far have been murdered by the state, and another 30 injured. Red Planet listeners and viewers will remember that we reported on several people killed by police and vigilantes, pro-government vigilantes, last year when young Kenyans took to the streets to protest generally against police brutality, corruption, and high taxes. As the price of all goods continues to increase due to the rising fuel costs, we can only expect the average person in Kenya to become more radicalized and engage in more strike and radical action. This is, of course, ongoing news about the protests against austerity measures and neoliberal centre-right measures in Kenya that we have covered here on the stream. So we will endeavour to keep you updated. Again, apologies that there is no updates from this week, but I'm sure next week we will have some information about you, or at least in the future. So yeah, there you go. Just a little piece on Kenya there. Tim, why don't you tell us, staying on the continent of Africa, about what's going on in the south?
So there has been a declaration of war against the poor in South Africa. So South Africa's proposed PIE amendment bill has grassroots movements furious, with Abalali Basemunjolo, the country's largest urban poor movement, calling it a declaration of war against the poor. They say it's an attempt to criminalize poverty and crush organizing, not solve the housing crisis. So Abalali Basemunjolo, which is very hard for me to say, which means residents of the shacks in Zulu, is a socialist movement of shack dwellers in South Africa fighting for land and housing, which started in 2005 with a road blockade in Durban and now has over 115,000 members across 4 provinces. More than 20 of their leaders have been assassinated, and they blame the ruling ANC for it. Amnesty International has documented this, and it's even been raised at the UN Human Rights Council. What makes them different is they're completely grassroots. No paid leaders, NGO control, or ties to political parties. Academics call them neurotically democratic, and they run their meetings incredibly democratically and are constantly self-critical. So they've got international links with movements like Brazil's landless workers movement, and they're seen as one of the most effective civil society groups in South Africa, alongside the Treatment Action Campaign. They campaign against xenophobia too and push for democratizing society from the bottom up. So the current deal is that 32 years after apartheid ended, over 3.7 million families still have no housing, and the shortage grows by nearly 178,000 households every year. ABM argues that these occupations are grassroots urban planning, not crime. The original PIE Act was actually a good thing. It protected people from arbitrary evictions, requiring courts to consider if people would end up homeless before kicking them out. But the new amendments would make evictions easier, allowing courts to evict victim even with no alternative accommodation, and introduce criminal penalties for anyone who incites, arranges, organizes, or permits occupations, with fines up to 2 million rand, prison time, and asset seizures. This is a direct attack on organizers, activists, and community leaders. Even membership fees and contributions for basic infrastructure could be treated as criminal activity. A broad alliance, including trade unions, the SAFTU, Gawusa housing groups, and legal organization, is fighting back. ABM has made it clear they'll resist this bill in public consultations, on the streets, and in the courts. So this is a pretty incredible organization that has and is fighting this amendment. But hopefully we'll be able to keep you updated on this. Even finding information for the story was really difficult because there's very little news on it in English. Most of it's in Zulu, because even in South Africa, the only people that are really reporting on it are generally, press that is Zulu, as opposed to writing in English or even Afrikaans. But so hopefully we'll see. Hopefully we'll see that rules in their favor. Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's been happening back in America?
So yeah, again, this is a little bit old news, and I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if people have forgotten about this, but yes, this was a news story I was planning for last Sunday, where it happened the day before. So at around 6 p.m. local time on Saturday last week, a man opened fire at Secret Service agents at the White House. Yes, that's right. It's another completely unsurprising assassination attempt. More and more people are doing this. In what is the eighth or ninth attack in areas around the president or directly against him in the last fucking year or so. The paedophile president of the dying empire once again said it was completely necessary to build my new beautiful ballroom in a statement that definitely wasn't designed to appeal to the Supreme Court, who's been saying that funding for the new building can only be approved if there is a genuine national security risk that is mitigated by the new design. So on Truth Social, he said, and this is the second time you're hearing me read a Trump Truth Social post today. Thank you to our great Secret Service and law enforcement for the swift and professional action taken this evening against a gunman near the White House who had a violent history and possible obsession with our country's most cherished structure. The gunman is dead after an exchange of gunfire with the Secret Service agents near the White House gates. This event is 1 month removed from the White House correspondent dinner shooting and goes to show how important it is for all future presidents to get what will be the most safe and secure space of its kind ever built in Washington, D.C. The national security of our country demands it. Of course, he's referring to the ballroom. Absolutely mad shit. Statements like this are, of course, funny, but simply a complete nightmare for those who engage in the reality of the decline of society in America due to fascism and increased austerity, as we know that there is going to be continued examples of this weird terrorism, which seems to be rooted in adventurism and bourgeois electoral politics idea of we should kill the Republican president because we'll get a Democratic one. That appears to be what it is. And of course, that will not do anything good. That will not be good. That isn't what would happen anyway. And it is indicative of the lack of education in America, I think, just broadly, not just education of a political sense, but certainly just generally speaking. The awful material conditions which include education of the American people. So full love and solidarity with our comrades across the pond, but it is just something that we can expect again and again and again. So there you have it. There is the news from last week, and next week I'm sure there'll be news from that week. But yeah, there you go. That's what it was this week. Don't forget, Red Planet is indeed a show where we need your money, and we would like to remind you that you can go to patreon.com/red_planet and you can give us money there, and it will be very good if you do that, because it does in fact mean that we can do more and more things. We can grow the show, we can do some editing, etc, 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 and all these kinds of things are very good for the show. So there you go. Please support us. Now, we are going to move on to the main topic of the show, where we are going to revisit something that we have spoken about in a variety of ways over the course of the show's history, and it is, in fact, conflict resolution and restorative justice. So I will be basically leading the discussion because this is something that I have a bit of experience in now, having, as I said, chairing this abolitionist organization and engaging in community repair and conflict resolution, getting a bit of training in conflict resolution from my time in Great Manchester Tenants Union. And yeah, we're going to be talking essentially just broadly about, how you can learn how to do conflict resolution, what the basics of it are, understanding why restorative justice is important if you aren't quite sold on the idea of prison abolition or just generally speaking courts, and criminal justice abolition, because, well, I'm going to get into that. So yeah, first off, what is restorative justice. Now, I'm aware that I'm probably going to be speaking quite a lot in this episode, so I'm going to put this as a question to you, Tim. What do you think is restorative justice?
So yeah, for me, it's very different because coming from a different cultural background, I would say, where we do have kind of like a cultural conception of this process already. But my basic description, or I guess the way I would put it to someone would be, um, a process that is meant to, so I mean, down here we would say the mana, but to the process that is meant to restore the I guess like the dignity and what was lost from the victim, while also respecting that the perpetrator of the crime has their own kind of like dignity and humanity to respect as well. That's probably the way that I would do it without using any specific Maori words or terms or whatever.
Yeah.
But how does that line up with your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, like, like most things, right? We learn from the past and the way, that humans, have evolved to like deal with these things entirely. Obviously, like you bring in the like indigenous Aotearoa perspective there is like super key, because, that is how we have handled things in human existence for millennia, right?
Yeah.
Since
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, so based on the reason that I mean our culture kind of practices these ways is because relatively small communities that all had to live close to each other. So it's like, if something bad happens, you can't just like, like what are you gonna do? Like there's this person that you're probably gonna be around. You can't just like, well, like it's uh one of those things where it's like a system that was created by necessity from people having to live in the same community as people that could possibly have harmed them, and I think that's why a lot of other similar communities around the world have invented similar processes and practices over the years.
1000%, absolutely. The way that I try and think about restorative justice is that it's not just that restorative nature of what you described, where actually it is about healing, right? It is about actually healing the sort of harm that has come from criminalizing people and punishing them and incarcerating them, right? Because these things, what we understand to be the basics of prison abolition and justice, a total, not just like it would be a reform of justice because there is still the element of justice there, but it would be the abolition of the current justice system, which is punitive and carceral.
Yeah.
But like, what most people understand, to be the reason for that being necessary is that it does harm people. And I think that that's like the best way to actually like start this conversation, like with that understanding, like you excellently put, like it is about healing. It is about understanding that like there is something that is lost from a person when they experience harm, but there is also something that has been lost from someone who was perpetrated harm, right? And if we think of it in terms of harm and harm reduction, I think that that is like the best way to understand stuff. I think that the way that I have done it, because I'm when I have discussions like this, I try desperately to make people understand that I was not always of the idea that prisons should be abolished. I generally was propagandized in the same way that most people are. I thought that prisons were like a holiday camp. That's what they say in the UK all the time. It's like, oh, they just get to play the PlayStation and do whatever they want, blah, blah, blah. It was actually only when we did the show with Prisoner Solidarity Network, if you remember that, Tim. I don't know if you were there for that one. I think you were.
Yeah.
Where like we spoke to like a couple of people from that org, and they were telling us about the reality of the prison system in the UK, and how deeply harmful it is, how it tortures people, how the majority of people in prison are petty offenders, is what John said. The guy that was on, he said. like, yeah, of course, there's going to be people in there who've, murdered people, raped people, pedophiles, etc. But the absolute overwhelming majority are people who were caught doing a petty crime years and years ago in their youth. Like, maybe they stole a chocolate bar from a shop, and then they got into a scrap with a security guard, and then they got prosecuted by the Crown for actual bodily harm and theft, right? And that resulted in a prison sentence. And then as soon as you go into prison because of the way that you are treated inside, and also when you leave prison and there are no rehabilitative, you know,
Yeah.
levers in society in order to be able to, help people get to a stage where they can get a job, where they can speak to normal people again. Depending on how long you've been inside, you may have become completely acclimatized to being inside, and therefore you actually don't want to be on the outside anymore.
Yeah.
Like the normal
Yeah.
world doesn't work for you. That's what they call being institutionalized.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, it's a thing. If you've ever, been around people that have been formerly incarcerated, you can tell, like, I will see someone walking down the street or like, on the bus or whatever like that. And you can tell like that guy's been inside for a certain amount of time, the way that he looks at the world, the way that he carries his body. Like this is a person that has been irreparably changed by, like by the way that the system has treated him. And so, it's like, oh yeah, he could be like, like a murderer or something like that, but this could actually just be a person that got locked up for something shitty and something minor, and then just snowballed their life, and now they've become a very different person to who they would have been if they hadn't been caught up in that system.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, 1,000%. It's understanding that those people who get caught for petty offenses. So I guess the best way that I could explain this is to sort of like give people an idea, if people are listening who have never like known anyone who's been through the court system in the UK, or like I guess like anywhere, because generally speaking it's the same pretty much all over the imperial court. You're going to have like maybe slightly different processes and different laws, but generally speaking the way that it works is, if you are someone who doesn't have a lot of money, if you come from a working class background, if you are precarious, you get picked up. There's a couple of things that could happen. If you're under 18, you could get put into care if you don't have like proper representation or help, or, your parents can't find you proper representation or help. When you get put into care is essentially prison. They don't like the word care is like evil, because a lot of kids like pretty much like who've been through care will always describe a culture of abuse, often sexual abuse, not just by people who are running care homes, but also by other kids inside care homes, because a lot of the time, these kids come from situations where they may have been sexually abused and stuff. It's normalized for them, and they don't have the tools to actually like, help them get out of those kinds of mindsets and stuff. And also violence, there is violence in there as well.
Yeah, there
And
was
yeah,
oh sorry, just a little brief tangent. There was a statistic that I saw recently about how over 50% of the homeless people that live in Auckland are people that have aged out of the care system as well. And so this is another thing where it's like, like these kids from, getting put into state care, then they just kind of get put out into the streets, and then they ended up in jail as well. So it's like sometimes the crime is just like having to live, with the decisions that have been made for them,
yeah,
like they just end up on the street and doing crimes to do stuff. So yeah,
yeah.
there's so many situations like this.
That is 1,000%. It's going to be the same like all over the world essentially. If there is a system like that where you are, there is a possibility for your kids to be taken off you. They are going to end up in an institution like this, and then they become institutionalized. The name institution, is quite interesting, because like, yeah, if something is an institution, it's something that is supposed to be there for the rest of your life, that like looks after you, but it can of course be negative, and it's something that is there for the rest of your life that like hangs over you like a shadow and a demon, and eventually entraps you with concrete walls, right? And that is essentially the way in which people should understand the prison systems across the imperial court. Of course, in different countries, for example, like in the United States, you have like essentially legalized slavery, like, you know, like even though slavery was abolished in the United States, the overwhelming amount of people in United States detention facilities are black people
Yeah.
who have either suffered like a similar lack of care from society because of white supremacist society, and also they have been put to work inside prisons to just like, you know, work for free. They don't get paid. And, you know, they're making fucking license plates for the state, or they're making fucking, you know, what like some prisoners, they get put out on like forest fire or wildfire duty and stuff,
Mm.
which is just absolutely insane because it's like one of the most dangerous jobs of all time. They're not trained for it and shit. And yeah, Tim, obviously, like you could tell us about like the way in what that affects like the Maori population in Aotearoa, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yes. So Maori women in particular are the most disproportionately criminal incarcerated group in the, well, they were when the last time I checked the statistics. And it's the child uplifting also actually has a huge part in that. We've spoken before about well, yeah, we've mentioned a couple of times on the stream the, you know, like indigenous kind of like child uplifting thing. It's a thing all around the world, but down here it was a huge thing. A couple of years there was a huge state inquiry about it that kind of like, yeah, it was kind of frustrating because they were like, this thing has been a huge problem, but you know, like unfortunately there's nothing much is going to change. And yes, so there's this whole thing where it's like kids that get adopted out within the family due to traditional practices like whāngai, that's an illegal process according to the state. So to do that is grounds for having your child taken off you. So following traditional practice, giving a child to like maybe like a cousin or an aunt or uncle or whatever, instead of raising it yourself, they will then take that child from the family member and put it into you know, into another home, which then, you know, like both of, so this child, if left in that care, will eventually probably end up on the street or in jail, and the mother or the caregiver that had it also gets criminalized for that. But aside from that, there's also like, there's so many, you know, like we can talk about like the over policing of communities and all that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, I think most of my politics probably revolves around like, that's like such a core part of what I believe, or like the groups that I get involved with, is just specifically about the way that Maori communities are, I would say, yeah, over policed and incarcerated at a much higher rate than everyone else, and looking at the reasons why that happens and how we kind of deal with it and, you know, organize against it. So yeah, it's kind of wild because it's a huge it's a huge problem in our community that is only really kind of like barely acknowledged by the government or anything like that, when it's like we've had these like big inquiries, we've had, you know, like royal commissions, all these kind of things that go like, oh yeah, this is a problem, this keeps happening, this is, you know, and it never, like nothing ever changes. Whereas we do have these like traditional kind of I would say like restorative or transformative justice processes that do have crazily effective, like, well, like the evidence of them being super effective is huge, but then at the same time, the government that is always talking about being tough on crime and all this kind of stuff is constantly like, you know, like defunding or disempowering these groups, which then it's, you know, it's like this kind of thing of like, are we trying to deal with it like crime by stopping it before it happens, or reducing criminality and people that have already offended, or are we just talking about being tough on crime because we just want to punish them once the crime has already been committed, or, you know, whatever. And I mean, like, the, you know, to be super cynical but to be, I mean, correct, would be to look at, you know, like our government's links to the private prison industry and their plans of like massively expanding New Zealand's like I guess prison industry itself by creating a new like mega prison in Waikeria. Things like that where it's like it it paints a pretty dark picture when you can see that, like, oh, okay, so none of this stuff is actually about benefiting society. None of this stuff is about addressing the social causes of crime or punishment or anything like that. But there are ways we can do this, but it's just that no one with any institutional power or funding or anything like that actually wants to get involved. And I will say that a lot of the most, I guess, effective programs that I have personally seen have been iwi led, so have been run by tribes who are doing it in their community, in their area, locally. Aside from that, no one really wants to get involved. Aside from people like we have Destiny Church, the evangelical Maori church, that they run a lot of these programs, and they literally just run them as like a recruiting agency, which is fucking wild. But yeah, I wouldn't, despite what they say, I wouldn't refer to those as restorative justice programs at all. They're kind of more just like yeah, literally just like recruiting brown shirts. But that's probably a whole other issue. um yeah.
100%. I think yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on, Tim, and like yeah, appreciate you mentioning all that stuff, because it is just absolutely correct when we talk about like restorative justice processes that actually like work. When Tim was talking about the fact that there are restorative justice processes where it's like these are very effective and stuff like that. What we have to look at is, what do we want out of someone who has done harm to another person, or done harm to the community at large, possibly? What is the best thing that we want? And generally speaking, when you speak to most victims of harm, when you speak to most people, who have experienced something like this, generally speaking, unless they have been, super propagandized by the state and state propaganda, they, will say that they just want this stuff to stop. They want this person to stop doing this stuff and not do it to anyone else. The solution that the state gives to that is clearly, we put them in a concrete box and therefore they can never do anything to anyone while they're in that concrete box, and we will just lie and say that that will make them better, that will make them more mentally well, and therefore they won't do any more harm to anyone. Of course, this is nonsense. The prison system, is so effective at like, I guess like achieving social contract status. Like there isn't a huge prison abolition movement, particularly in the UK. You get all kinds of activists saying that they're abolitionists and stuff, but they actually do not know the ins and outs of prison abolition and what it means, and why people commit harm, how you can basically help people who've committed harm, or help people who've been harmed and stuff. But like,
yeah, and there's
the reason,
also like, I think that like individually a lot of activists are abolitionists, but it also does take, like, there needs to be abolitionist orgs operating as well, like,
1,000%,
like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Like people are not given, like, that's a key thing, Tim. Absolutely, like people need direction with this stuff, right? And in order for direction to happen, there needs to be someone sort of leading the charge, and that is like, this is, it's a big blind spot. There are so many reasons as to why we talk about this on Red Planet, and obviously we're going to get into the extra bits of it, but the reason that people who do harm, like, this is a key thing to understand about what Tim was saying about like why a restorative justice system can be so effective. A lot of the times when we, for example, you might see like a court show on TV or whatever, or maybe you've just had like an experience with someone where that they've done something wrong, like they've wronged you in some way, even if it's not harm, even if they just like transgressed against you, like maybe they've, borrowed something off you, lied about it, and that's pissed you off, right? A lot of the times when people deny this stuff, it is genuinely or generally because we have an idea that permeates our societies that is that people are either good or bad. No one wants to be a bad person. That is just the reality of it. And so when it comes to someone actually having, caused harm to someone, which, a lot of the times people are conscious that they do it. Sometimes people are not conscious that they do it. One of the best phrases that I've ever been taught by one of my good friends, who I keep trying to get on the show, but she often is very modest and doesn't want to do it, and maybe is a bit shy actually about it. But one of my good friends, who is a 70-year-old lesbian who did great work, basically dealing with sexual violence complaints in left-wing organizations for like the last 50 years. She was on Greenham Common and all this kind of stuff. She told me a great phrase, and I stick by it all the time, because when we're involved in something like this, where we know someone who's been harmed or someone who's done harm or something like this, we often really try and pathologize it. Right, we really try and pathologize it. And we say things like, well, that person's obviously done that because they're a dominating character. Do you remember that one time when, like, you tried to take their drink off them and then they wouldn't let you do it? Yeah, that's a really dominating behavior. And it's like, no, 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 no. You got to fucking get rid of all of that stuff. You got to stop all of that stuff. It's ridiculous. People do all kinds of things for all kinds of reasons. And that is the best way to understand people generally. Like, I know that is... like, some people won't be happy with that as a concept, but it is true. People do all kinds of things for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes people don't think about the ramifications of their actions. Sometimes people forget the kind of thing that they're doing can upset or harm people or change people's lives and stuff. A lot of the time people do things because they are scared or they think that something bad is going to happen to them. Sometimes people do things because they do want to dominate someone and they do want to stop someone from behaving in a particular way or something like this. The key thing that I'm trying to get across from this episode is that there is no such thing as a purely evil person, right? People can do evil things. People can do good things. There is no such thing as a purely good person. There is no such thing as a purely evil person. And the state is desperate for us to categorize people in that way.
Yeah.
What you find often when you engage in a restorative justice process with conflict resolution is that when you reassure somebody that they are not going to be harmed as a result of this, like they are not, like, no one's calling the cops on you, no one is, gonna, I guess, like, do a post about you on Twitter, no one's going to follow you home and beat you up or anything like that. Once you get to a point where that person trusts you that they that these bad things are not going to happen to them, a magical thing happens, and instead of being in denial about it, they will go, yes, I did this thing. Right now, the key thing to understand about that psychologically is that you have removed the bad label from them, right? You have removed this, like, fear of them being labeled as a bad person, and they can often sit with it, and they, and it can be an emotional thing, and they can cry, they can yell, they can scream, the people can have all kinds of, people can have all kinds of reactions to it and do all kinds of things. And I'm not massively experienced in this stuff, but from what I've seen, it's like this is the reality. Like, people will either I've done conflict resolution processes that have gone very badly. I've done conflict resolution processes that are going really well. And certainly in the ones that have gone badly, the key thing that has stopped the person who has, not even the person who has done harm, because sometimes when you do this stuff, it could be two parties that have done harm to each other, right? The key thing that stops anyone from feeling like they've harmed someone is when they are, like, they're obsessed with this idea of, like, no, I'm the good person, I'm the good one, I'm the good one. There are two outcomes to this, I'm the good one. It's never as clear as that. It just is never as clear as that. So that is the necessity of understanding. There's
like something that I think that I learned very early into kind of learning about abolition and stuff. I think there is like a famous quote from someone, it's probably like Angela Davis or someone, talking about it, saying that the kind of core of these processes is understanding that absolutely everyone is capable of, like, really good, really pure, amazing kind of things, but also just, like, everyone is equally capable of really terrible things. And a lot of the time, it just comes down to circumstance, or like the conditions that someone might do something terrible, and they could be otherwise be the nicest person, the fucking coolest guy, whatever, or the person that's a victim could also be just like a total fucking prick, someone that is loathed by their community, like and it's never really as simple as this is the right person, this is the wrong person. And I mean, that doesn't mean that someone that's a victim always has done something wrong, obviously not, like but it's just that I would say on the side of the person that has perpetrated the harm, then usually it's not as simple. Well, I mean, it's never as simple as like this person is an evil sociopath with a black mark on their soul that
Yeah.
just it's not yeah, it's never that simple. But
Yeah. Like
yeah,
you kind of exhibited that a little bit there, Tim, when
mm,
you like panicked a bit because you were concerned that, if people hear you saying that like victims can be like people who've done horrible things, that people might assume that you are saying, all victims are bad.
yeah,
That
yeah,
is like that is part of what I'm saying in terms of like the semantics of the way that like
yeah,
society wants you to think about people in these binary terms, right? Like someone is
yeah,
either a victim or someone who did a crime. And it's
mm,
like, no, actually, everything is messy. Like,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
people are complex and people are. So yeah, it's that like,
mm,
um, it's about as it is with everything, it's about smashing binaries and it's about
mm,
smashing like black and white thinking down to the the actual reality
yeah.
of what it is. So yeah, sorry, no, I just wanted to point that out when you said that
No, no,
because
no,
I was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
that's a great example, right?
Mm, yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
when it comes to, in terms of like understand, because, and again, like I will use what you said actually as a jumping board to like sort of talk about this, because if we think
Mm,
about things in these like very basic state, um, uh, defined ways of like going, well, this is the victim and this is the perpetrator. There's a very famous court case that we spoke about on literally the last show of Red Planet, where there was a victim that was an Israeli weapons factory.
mm,
So,
yeah,
when we are forced to think about these things in these like black and white,
yeah,
binary terms and stuff like that, that's the kind of thing that it can end up fucking us over with,
yeah,
because if you were to just say this to someone, your average normie in the street, like, oh, there's a court case and the defendant, right? So read the evil guys are
yeah,
these guys who smashed up this weapons factory, and then the complainant, the good guy, is this weapons factory.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, that's
they're
yeah.
gonna read
I
it like
mean,
that.
not to get too focused on these kind of specific cases, but yeah, they often do, like prevent the jury from knowing certain things. Like so a lot of the time it'll be like, oh, like it was just these people smashed up this fucking this factory, or like sometimes you'll even see, especially on Twitter and stuff, you'll see referred to as like this is like a Jewish owned business, and it's like, oh wow, it's an Israeli weapons factory, like,
This is it. This is it.
yeah,
Yeah, it is the, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is basically explained in the great Sarah Schulman book, Conflict is Not Abuse.
yeah.
She actually uses Zionist propaganda as an explainer
Oh,
for
actually
understanding
that's
why
good.
conflict is
Mm,
not abuse. Yeah, I haven't read it like entirely. It's one of them ones that like I pick up every now and then. I put a post-it note in it. I think I should make a video about this, and then I just
mm,
never do it. But it's a really good way to sort of like think about that. It's like, because if we think about Israel, actually, if we think about the Zionist entity known as Israel, that's actually like a really good example for thinking about the sort of zenith as to, where imperial core society has led to. Like imperial core
yeah,
society has led to this situation where a occupying force is saying that up is down, left is right. Terrorists are freedom fighters, essentially.
yeah,
And That's exactly it. It's the weaponizing of that kind of, binary idea of good and bad. Often you will hear like the idea that Palestinians need to be perfect victims, right? And that also like
Yes,
lines
yeah.
up with what we're talking about. So yeah, it's a completely like relevant thing to talk about, particularly. And people might think, well, Mule, how does this even filter down to like your average person? And it's like, well, I hope I've done a bit of explaining on that, but it really does come down to the fact that Tim is spot on. There is a huge private prison lobby, right?
Mm.
Prisons historically have been a place where the state essentially wants to remind working class people that if you rise up against the state, you are going to be put in a dungeon, right? That's time immemorium, medieval dungeons, oubliettes, all this kind of thing. Don't fuck with the state. We can do what we want to you. And it has evolved. It has evolved since then because, of course, neoliberalism meant that even state institutions like prisons can be privatized. And so, outside of this, necessity for the state to have a dungeon where they can put you, where they can do whatever they like to you, there is now the incentive where private corporations are going to get paid £50,000 per prisoner. So there is an incentive for the government, whoever is in charge in the government, to direct the police to arrest a certain amount of people each month, and for the courts to process a certain amount of people each month, and not just that, but also for juries to be directed to actually not think about their morals and stuff. When we were talking with Jordan a couple of weeks ago, Jordan was telling us about the fact that he had, one of their barristers, I don't know if it was, all of their barristers or one of their barristers, but one of their barristers reminded the jury during the trial that they could vote with their conscience, right? And this is true. You can vote with your morals. There is absolutely no reason to say that you have to like unemotionally completely deal with the direct evidence of the case, right? And you can absolutely make a decision based on your own moral standing and your conscience of how to make this happen, right? But because of the way in which that private prisons are incentivized to actually make money on the incarceration of people and get paid by the state, they will we will in fact just start to see more and more juries be told directly by the judge, you cannot do things in the way that you think you can, right? The judge will sit there and go, no, don't think about the emotional aspect of the case. Don't let it affect you. Don't feel sorry for the defendant any more than you feel sorry for the complainant, etc., etc. It is an evil, evil, evil process. And I think that brings us kind of neatly onto the necessity of community repair via conflict resolution, because this is a huge, huge problem that me and Tim are talking about. Like, it's massive. It is not just statewide, it's international. You will not really find one single country. There's one fucking thing that every cunt likes to fucking say to me when I say I'm a prison abolitionist. They'll say to me, name one country where it's worked, where there's no prisons. And I always say, like, thousands of years ago before we had them, but often they'll be like, oh, they don't fucking understand that. But that's the point that they're making. And
like you do get that, or they'll be like, oh well, society's changed since then. It's like, well, maybe we should change society then.
Exactly, yeah. If society is the problem, crazy idea, bro. Hammer and sickle, but so that's the whole thing. So these are huge problems that seem like really insurmountable, but as with everything, this starts with organizing. So how does community repair relate to organizing? We need to understand that, if I have been successful in agitating you and radicalizing you to the point where you realize, oh my God, yeah, prisons don't work. Prisons don't rehabilitate people. They don't, for example, they don't stop rapists from raping people in the future. They don't stop people from being violent if they've been violent, and that's why they've been in there. There is none of this stuff happens. And even if you're sat there and you're still concerned about, well, hang on a minute, if we just stop prisons tomorrow, what's to say that everyone isn't just going to go for a free for all? guess what? Prison abolitionists aren't stupid. And we understand that these things need to happen in a, incremental fashion. Like, you absolutely are not going to be able to
Yeah.
just like
Well,
smash every
yeah,
prison down tomorrow.
that's exactly what they say. They say like, well, like, or like they'll say, you want to let everyone out right now. You want to close them up, let them go, or you don't want to prosecute, people that are currently being charged. Or, like they'll point to like famous prisoners, like in New Zealand, they always go, oh, so you want to let the Christchurch shooter out? It's like, well, no, because so we're organizing for a system that we think will be better, like eventually or whatever. This is a long goal, but we understand that the world that we are organizing in right now is very different to that. So the goal of abolition is to create a world where, the mass incarceration system is not necessary. And everyone has different ideas about, like, different organizations have different ideas about what that will take and what that end goal is or whatever. But it's like, it's like this capitalist system that is creating and profiting from this, like this criminalize from the criminalization of these people or whatever, then going like, well, how is your perfect system going to instantly fix the problems of ours? And it's like, well, this is a long-term thing, right? And it's like, it's okay to look at something in the future and be like, this is our ideal system, but we can recognize that we're not in that system right now.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, like, like no prison abolitionist is going to say, oh yeah, you should let, this like mass shooter or whatever free. Like nothing like that. Like
Yeah.
people make the arguments like, oh, this person should be rehabilitated or whatever like that. But yeah, anyone that makes those assumptions, I think like they just hear the word abolition and they're like, that just means to close something down, to get rid of it. It's like,
Yeah.
well, the actual goal is to create a world where it's abolished because the necessity is just not there,
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like when you think about the dual power thing, right? Like, when you talk about revolutionary structures, people are like, "Whoa, revolution, doesn't that mean guns and killing?" And it's like,
Yeah.
actually, no. Like the goal is to create a system where, we rely upon each other so we don't have to rely on the state. The
Yeah.
state makes itself irrelevant. So yeah, spot on.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, the term insurrection kind of implies like, more like an active, like violent thing, but revolution literally just means like a change of something,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, it means
yeah.
it's literally like a turning circle, right? Like the revolution of a circle. So yeah, like absolutely. That's the necessity of understanding, like if you have decided to adopt the position of being a prison abolitionist, we have now equipped you with the retort that you have with any of your normie friends when they hear you talk about prisons in this new impassioned way where, maybe you go away and you read some literature, you might read some Angela Davis, you might read some Sarah Schulman, you might read some, more radical kind of ideas about prison and stuff like that. And, you get very passionate about it. And they say to you, but if you just prisons, everyone's going to just kill everybody and rape everybody. You go, yeah, no, we understand that utopia is not around the corner. We're being, measured in this understanding. But how do we start? How does it start? And, what does it start with? The argument really is that we should be engaging in conflict resolution, just broadly speaking, in our everyday lives, our everyday communities, and in our organizations. Relating to organizing, there is a definite phenomena in the organizing movement where there can be people who are paralyzed by conflict. And it is very simple because conflict can be troublesome. It can be worrying. It can be, I don't know about anybody else's experience, but when I first started getting involved with like left-wing activism movements, like the immediate thing that you have is like, oh my God, I'm in this like big room with all these people who agree with me. It's like a far cry from being sat with your fucking family at Christmas and they're just going like, we're gonna get rid of all these fucking wokes. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, it's beautiful, it's amazing, you feel like elated, you feel like you're part of something. And then all of a sudden, when someone says something that you are like, oh, I'm not sure about that. Like, maybe you're not a prison abolitionist, but you come across a prison abolitionist, right? And you're like, and you have that reaction where you go,
Yeah.
wait a minute, what about the rapists, right? That is when conflict arises, because conflict can take many forms. It doesn't necessarily mean someone says something and you react immediately, either with violence or yelling or crying or anything like that. It can be someone says something to you that you aren't prepared for. You walk away from the interaction, you think about it, you stew about it, you start to pathologize this person, you create a version of this person in your head, and then all of a sudden, the next time you have an interaction with them, it's worse, and then it starts to snowball, and then that person realizes that person doesn't like me for some reason, and then they start to do the same thing, right? Conflict can be most easily understood in these terms, right? Conflict is natural, it's normal, and hey, guess why it happens? It's because we're just kind of like very evolved apes that, like, we have a very interesting brain, but we aren't like, we're not omniscient. We can't tell what people are thinking. And we have to trust each other. Like we live in a society based on trust. And, the reason why, we talk about prison abolition and, when we talk about it, we're passionate about it. It's because generally we understand that, like, if human beings were naturally insane, violent, greedy, horrible creatures, we would just be stabbing each other regardless of the prison system. Everyone would just, as soon as you go out the door, just stab a random person because whatever, it's what we do. Of course, that isn't how we act, right? We all know that isn't reality. We are actually soft animals. So when you understand conflict to be that, right, it is a lack of understanding between two people. Conflict can escalate. It can turn into violence. It can turn into sexual violence. It can turn into, ostracization. It can turn into, a sort of like mob rule situation where, you get a bunch of people. Like, for example, when we try and figure out why a person is saying or doing the things that they are saying, we will often find ourselves in a group of other people and say something like, oh, this guy said this to me the other day, and I'm not really sure about it, but like it got me thinking, like, that's a bit crazy. Like, why would he say that? And then all of a sudden, because of the kind of creatures that we are, we end up building a picture of somebody amongst this, small contingent group. Those things can escalate, and those things can turn into factions, right? You can create a faction without even realizing it in an organization, and your entire goal within that organization may literally be to get this person out of the organization. And if there is a faction that opposes you, and people do not agree, and people think, well, I think there's just been a big misunderstanding here, that could become entirely paralyzing for the organization, because you have two, factions that don't agree. The conflict between two people has escalated to a conflict between two factions. It may even be wider than that. It could be several factions. And so this is the key importance in understanding why conflict resolution has to be something that is just set out from day one when it comes to organizations. You have to have a process that works. Now, there are some organizations that are very like authoritarian with it, and it is like, if you don't get on with your comrade, that's your fucking problem. Deal with it, right? Except for the cases of things where, like, if you're in the organization, you may have been sexually harassed, or you may have been like assaulted or something like this. They may have some like, rules about that and stuff like that. What you find is with a lot of lefty organizations in the Imperial Core is that they just haven't like bothered with any of this because they don't think it's a problem. Like, we generally do not see it as a problem in organizing certainly in the UK. I don't know if this is the case in I would say Roatim, but like there's a contingent of activists in the UK movement that are not really thinking about things in terms of like material conditions, and you will often find you will often find that some people who are being seen as the problem in the org, who are like being pushed out. These are often the most vulnerable people. They're precarious,
Yeah.
they're marginalized, they're black, they're queer, stuff like that.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we've seen it before in orgs where there's like people that come from, like maybe like they got into organizing through more like liberal kind of channels, or like, people that maybe got really excited by, there'll be like some particular flashpoint that radicalized them, and they maybe haven't actually like learned any more from what they first became acquainted with. Like back in the day, this used to be Occupy, and then it kind of became like, I guess, like Black Lives Matter and stuff. There was like a lot of people that were like, instead of looking at, like seeing something like Black Lives Matter, instead of looking at the real material things about, like what leads to the disenfranchisement of Black Americans and like the systemic issues and all this kind of stuff, like just focusing on, I guess, like the identity element, which, we say is like the liberal identity politics sort of stuff. And I've seen people that from that kind of like from that school of organizing or whatever, perform like some pretty crazy, like, I guess, like takedowns of people that are coming at it from a more like materialist kind of lens or whatever, like there's like, and I mean, like, there's obviously, there's like a thing of being too focused on either one is usually going to cause you troubles, especially when you're organizing with actual other people or whatever. But yeah, I've seen some pretty horrible things over the years that have led to people just being like, people that were good, doing good work, being pushed out of organizing completely because someone that has just kind of picked up politics as a hobby from Instagram has, like, decided to get involved or whatever. And the wild thing is that there's usually like a huge class disparity here. Like you were saying, how usually it's like, it's like a person that might be like black or trans or someone getting kicked out. Like I've literally seen, like trans people, like poor Maori people getting pushed out of orgs, led by campaigns from people that are like, stereotypically kind of, like white kids from better backgrounds with, like like literally, like, I like, it's gonna sound like a bit of a force, a bit too on the nose, but like kids with trust funds and stuff.
No, it is. It absolutely is. That is absolutely the situation here as
Yeah,
well. And I'm glad that you said it and not me.
But it's also like, I don't want to be too like I guess, that does get into that really like kind of like identity politics kind of thing, where it's like, well, just because someone is poor and Maori doesn't mean that they're correct all the time. It's like
Yep.
that kind of shit. But yeah, but in cases that I have seen personally, there's been stuff like that. And and it's usually, I think, people come around, they come around a little bit later and they go like, oh, that person that was really, the person that was leading that whole kind of charge, they don't even come to meetings anymore, or like they don't do anything, or now they're just trying to be like a fucking influencer in some other way. Whereas like now this person that was really good, like we just have no idea what happened to them.
Yep. They
Um,
could be fucking dead. They could have no fucking friends.
yeah,
They just,
yeah,
people just
exactly.
don't fucking know. And
Yeah,
and that's the thing. Like people do not understand the harm that they do by
yeah,
engaging in
yeah.
this exaggeration of
I would
conflict,
actually,
right?
yeah, as well. And just some other cases that come to mind. People that are addicts as well usually get treated horrifically in a lot of organizing circles, which I think is something that a lot of people really have to grapple with. Because yeah, like, yeah, there's some people I know that unfortunately like both of them are no longer with us, who were in active addiction, but both like incredible organizers, particularly within the community of other people that are, suffering with active addiction. Um, and yeah, like it's just one of those things that people are good. Like if you want to be an effective organizer in these spaces, you have to get used to organizing with people that may make you a little bit uncomfortable. And I know that a lot of people that didn't grow up in, like, if people didn't grow up in kind of working class, like, well, I would say the lower end of working class communities, they're probably like, people might be a bit squicked out by, like, like hanging out with people that are like, like actively doing like methadone or heroin or something like that. But like the reality is that like this is a movement for those people,
Right,
like this
exactly. Yeah,
is,
it
yeah,
becomes less about liberating the working class and more about like just liberating me particularly, right? Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
yeah,
it's that
yeah, yeah.
level of privilege in it.
Mm,
And yeah, like these things happen, generally speaking, because normal everyday conflict gets escalated to the level of abuse. So,
yeah,
the harm that is done is exaggerated quite
yeah,
often.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
whether, yeah,
yeah,
it will,
yeah. And I think
go on.
like that also happens when when people do talk about like drug use, as people will see that as a form of harm against themselves from being exposed to somebody else that is, a drug user, which is
It's
just,
fucking insane,
yeah, it's
man.
just like, just fucking, like you're gonna have to get used to this. You're gonna have to
Yeah.
kind
Oh
of deal with that.
no, I
And
saw an
I
EP.
mean, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
If you
it's
think
like,
about like the reality of it, it's like, oh no, I saw someone use a needle. It's like, okay, unless you're like afraid of needles, right? Unless you have like a
mm,
genuine like fear of needles, it's like what? So you're gonna be like that when a diabetic person is in the room. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, think
yeah,
about
yeah.
what you're fucking saying, you idiot, right?
And
Like,
it's like, I mean, like obviously there's stuff attached to like drugs and all that kind of stuff, and blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. But I think just at the end of the day, it's kind of like that thing where it's like, it just, like, as long as someone isn't like, blowing crack smoke in your face, like, fuck off. Like,
yeah,
like
yeah,
people, like, I've never seen, like, of all the people that I know that have been involved in politics that are in active addiction, I've never seen someone like show up, to a planning meeting before a protest and be like, hold up, guys, do you mind if I just like shoot up in the middle of the room? It's like that doesn't happen. That, like, it's like, if their drug use is their own business, then you can just let it be their own business. And
exactly.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
I mean, like, I feel like,
you could just not say anything. Yeah,
yeah, when things are, if something is, if it is damaging and it is affecting the way that people are, you know moving in that space, then I think that it is useful to have people that are, um drug users, to be in the organization, to be able to handle that kind of thing.
yeah.
Because I think, unfortunately, I think that it's one of those things that a lot of people just have a lot of baggage with, that even, even otherwise really compassionate and smart people do have a lot of baggage to do with that. So
1,000%.
yeah.
Yeah, I think
Mm,
that that's the the key thing to understand. And me and Tim have done a fairly decent job of sort of displaying the clear material realities of what actually happens when this kind of conflict happens in organization. Um, of course, there is conflict that happens where actual harm has occurred, right?
mm,
And it is, this is a reality of life. We can't pretend that this doesn't happen. We can't sit here and, engage in any kind of ideology that says that, harm is impossible or anything like that.
yeah.
So we have to deal with the reality that, what a thing that a person is telling you could entirely be true. Now, if you choose to engage in conflict resolution, there are a couple of things that you need to understand. One, conflict resolution does not feel in any way like a pressure valve has been released, right? This is the key thing to
Mm,
understand. If you and your organization choose to go a route of conflict resolution, the goal of the conflict resolution is something that is only really set between the people involved, right? So if there are two people involved, there might be one person who sits there and says, well, I just really want this person to not behave like this, right? Now, when you choose to engage in a restorative justice process, you are not necessarily engaging in what is called an accountability process, right? Now, accountability
mm,
processes, there's a lot of like discourse around accountability processes, like what is an accountability process? Is an accountability process punitive and shit like that? You know, people have to be there for accountability processes, and people have to consent to taking part in them. People have to facilitate them. This is not something I have any experience in, so I'm not going to talk about it. And I'm going to come from the position that, you know, these two people would not want that to happen to each other, right? So if you are going to engage in this, then basically what needs to happen is there needs to be an agreement from both sides to actually engage in the process where they understand genuinely, and this, it's going to sound insane and people are going to be like, why does anyone bother doing this? But it's true, and it is often far more helpful than punitive justice, is that they have to agree that they might not get what they want. They simply might not get what they want, even if what they want is to just tell the person that what they did to them was really bad, right? You know, it is, you know, we have to understand that everybody is, you know, everybody is, it has to decide to agree that they have, you know, done something that has harmed another person, right? You know, it's what I was talking about before. Like, there are going to be, like, if there is a situation, it depends how spun out it has become, right? It depends how big the conflict has escalated into being. If it's become a really big conflict, if it's something that's been going on for years, you're going to find it harder to, you know, get these people to agree to engage in a process like this, or you know, actually think about what it is that they want in a productive manner. The first step is essentially that, right? You need to get both sides to start a process. Now, if you are going to learn to be a mediator, if you're going to learn to be someone who facilitates conflict mediation, you need to be a neutral person. You need to be someone totally neutral. It doesn't mean that you can't know either of the people involved. You just have to be certain that you are going to treat the process in a neutral way. As in, I will explain some parts of it in a second, but essentially it's that. So, you know, first and foremost, you absolutely cannot pressure people to do this, right? And that's essentially for one big major reason. If you force someone to go through a conflict resolution process, you might be forcing someone to do something they don't want to do, which is just kind of, you know, sketchy, just in an ethical sense. You will also be, you know, forcing someone to do something that they might not fully understand, and therefore it's just going to have a bad outcome. Because, you know, if you're sat there going like, well, you need to have a goal for this. What's your goal? What do you want to get out of this? And the person's like, I actually don't know. I don't know what to do about this. You're kind of stuck, right? Luckily, most people, when they have conflict with someone, they know what they want. They know what they want to get out of actually sitting down with a person and like having a conversation with them, if that's what they want to, that's the way they want it to go. So that's the first step. The first step is like, you know, you have to be a person that is approached. Now, I'm not saying you can't turn around to someone and say, oh, well, you know, I've got a bit of experience in this. I'm happy to mediate. I feel like I could be neutral in this situation. You know, do you want me to do a conflict resolution process? Because a lot of people don't know that this is a thing that some people want to do, and that just proves how fucking alienated we are to each other, right? for a start. So, you know, if you get them to agree to go to a process, the second bit is, as I said previously, finding out what those goals are. Like, what do they want to happen? So you might get someone who has been attacked by someone. So say, for example, someone has done physical violence to someone, and the other person basically just wants them to apologize in a meaningful way. That could sound like a pretty reasonable goal. It's pretty attainable. The other person might sit down and go, well, I want them to understand why I did it, right? That is also a completely feasible, attainable goal. You can't really sit there when you're doing this process and demand that someone change their goal. That is totally unethical. Like, I would argue against it entirely. This process is all about you encouraging people to do what they think is right. And that's not, when I say encouraging, going like, yeah, you really want to resolve this, don't you? You really want them to apologize, yeah? Like, none of that. None of that. Just, you ask them a simple question. What do you want out of this? And majority of the time, someone will tell you. They've thought about it for a long time. You know, a lot of the times conflict has been going on for a while and they've been thinking about this for a while, right? So that's the benefit of that. You set person's goals and then you tell them there is a possibility that you cannot get this goal. Are you okay with that? Right? Because if this person is, if it's a really like, you know, huge deal breaker as to whether this person that has harmed them physically actually admits to doing it and says, I'm really sorry about that, like they want a real apology and stuff like that, like you have to say, how are you going to feel if that doesn't happen? Right? And then you get them to sit with the emotions for a bit. And then you go, okay, what do you think you would want instead if that didn't happen? So you see the process is essentially getting them to say what their absolute utopic idea of like resolution in this situation is, which of course doesn't result in the other person going to jail because that's not what this is about. But you know what the ideal thing is, and then saying, okay, well, what would you be happy with, right? Let's go a step lower than that. What would you be happy with? And then, okay, well, let's say you don't get that. What would you be happy with? Okay, let's say you don't get that. What would you be happy with? And you go down this sort of like sliding scale of this, until you get to a point where you actually reinforce that, like, hey, you know that you might not get this either. You might not get anything out of this, and that's the sad reality. You have to prepare someone for the realities of it, right? Once you've done that, it is about getting both parties on the same page, and that is about addressing their reality. Addressing someone's reality can be as simple as going through the incident that happened. So, you know, in this situation of potential physical violence, party one might say, okay, well, they basically punched me in the face after I said this. I told them to stop and they didn't. They kept punching me in the face. This happened, right? Party two may go, well, it all started 10 years ago, right? And then you have to get to this point where it's like, okay, so, and then you're going to have to go back to party one and say, okay, well, party two said that you did this 10 years ago. How do you feel about that? They might go, what the fuck are they talking about? That's not real. What do you mean? You basically have to get them to a point where they accept each other's reality. So let's say, for example, the 10 years thing, right? 10 years ago, he said this about my mum. And then party one says, I never said that. You go back to party two and say, well, here's the thing. They said that they never said that. You know, what do you make of that? Party two might say something to the effect of, well, I kind of knew that they wouldn't, you know, remember that. So that's fine. And then you say to him, okay, well, do you want to include this in the discussion? You don't have to, you know, you have to ask yourself, like, you know, do you think that this is going to work? Do you think that it's worth saying this? How do you think they're going to respond when you say this to them face to face, if that's what you want, right? And then it's not really about talking them down. You don't want to be talking someone down. You just have to get them to figure out how important it is that a piece of information is gotten across in the sort of diplomacy of it, right? So then you might, like, you know, go back to the other person on this point and say, like, okay, well, they really don't want to let it go, right? They really don't want to let it go. So can you accept that that's their reality? Now, this is a key part, right? This is a key fucking part. And this is another thing that my friend that I was telling you about earlier has helped me to understand with people. It doesn't matter if you cannot see why, you know, someone doesn't think that a thing happened. Your perception is kind of irrelevant. Everybody has their own reality, right? We all experience and perceive reality in our own ways. Some people perceive and experience reality in vastly more intense ways than other people, and some people perceive reality in vastly understated ways. You know, that is the nature of our brains. That's the nature of things like neurodivergence. That's the nature of things like mental health. That's the nature of things like, trauma, right? So when it comes to people's reality, when it comes to conflict mediation, if there's something that two parties don't agree upon, you have to then go to the next stage under, which was like, well, can you accept that that is their reality? You don't have to agree, but, you know, the purpose of this is you want them to apologize, right? and it's likely, you know, you shouldn't really say things like it's likely that they won't apologize if you don't accept this. You know, you kind of have to like put it to them like this. How do you think that they will respond if you don't accept that? Right. And then, you know, they will probably make an accurate judgment depending on how well they know the person. They'll probably go, yeah, they'll probably be pissed off at that. And it's like, okay, so do you think it's worth it to do that? And they might go, well, yeah, because it's really important to me. That's kind of where you hit like a brick wall and you might have to reevaluate things. So sometimes it's not as easy as that. But essentially, like when you are doing this bit of the process, you have to get people to either agree. It's ideal to get people to agree on a point, like a majority of the points that are going to be raised, right? So like the reality of the other person, I agree on 70% of that. Okay, that's fine. I agree on 70% of that. Okay, that's fine. It doesn't have to be as black and white as that. You know, you kind of have to judge these things yourself. I'm not teaching you all how to do this stuff at this point. I don't think that, like, after just listening to me say this, anyone could go out and do this. I'm going to give you a couple of resources when we finish the episode. But yeah, you have to essentially get people to agree on the majority of the realities and then move forward. Then you have to go through the options of what they have in terms of communicating what it is they want or actually getting what they want out of the conversation. And again, this kind of comes down to going through each point, right? And saying, how do you think they're going to react when you say this, right? So you might say, you know, person one might say, you punched me and that meant that I couldn't watch boxing for 10 weeks, right? And you've already gone through the bit of like, how important is it for you to say this? Okay, it's quite important. It's time to revisit that bit and go, how do you think that person is going to react when they say that? And they might say, oh, he's going to tell me to piss off. And so then you say, okay, so how important really is it that you say that? Right? Did it really affect you to that point? It did. Okay, well, how important is it that you say that to them? Because this is just going to create more conflict, right? If they say it's really, really important, then they're just going to say it. Then, you know, it might be dead in the water. I don't know. It just depends on how the other person responds to that. But yeah, like it's about going through each point and saying, like, is this really like, you know, is it that important that you are going to risk more conflict happening because of it, right? And then finally, it's about what's happening next. Now, you have a couple of options. You know, one of the options you could do is you can present each side's, you know, sort of like, you know, notes, basically like bullet points and stuff like that. You could do that yourself as the mediator. Essentially, your role as the mediator is to absorb a lot of the negative emotions that come from conflict, right? So essentially what it is that you are offering to people is like, you know, you go to them with the points, you know, the opposite party from the, you know, the other party's points, and you go, right, so this is what they said. How do you feel about that? And they might go, fucking bastard, what a fucking bastard. I can't believe you said, you know, like absolutely, like it's untenable that they would say this. What a dickhead. You let them get it all out. And then you say, do you think you would be able to not react like that if you sat down with them in person and they said this? And then that's the key there, where you have to like get them to a point where they feel like they could be with this person in the same room while you're there, like not just on their own, like, you know, it could be a Zoom call as well or something, right? And essentially just like, you know, sit there, try and deal with it and go, you know, in their head, I understand that they're saying this because they're pissed off. I understand that they're saying this because they're upset. And you can see as I'm explaining this that is what this is leading to. It's leading to building an understanding of the other party, right? From each other party's perspective, because that's the key thing about conflict. We do not understand why a person has done a thing, right? We don't understand what it is that they're thinking. We don't understand their reality. What you are doing in this process is you are establishing the reality and you are creating an understanding, you know, and you're mediating it essentially. So in terms of that, that is a essential basic 101 conflict resolution process. This process is called the GROW method. I think it's called the GROW method. I don't know if it's the GROW something or other. Now, the crazy thing about the GROW method is that it's actually very, very simple. It was never developed to be conflict resolution, right? It was developed to be a coaching method, right? it is a coaching method. You could use it as a coaching method for anybody, essentially. So, for example, like instead of using it for conflict resolution, you could say, "What goals do you want to set? What do you want to do in your life? What do you want to do with your art in the next 10 years, etc." And then you go through literally all the same things. But the easier part of it is that there's not another person on the side going like, "That's bollocks. I never said that." Yada yada yada. The GROW method is literally the acronym of the things that I was talking about in the different points, the different sections of the 101 section. It's basically goals, reality, options, and what's next, right? So that's how that works. You can find it on the internet, just like don't use an AI summary because it's going to be wrong. And it is important to remember that like when you get it, when you get it fucking presented to you, when you look at these different websites that like list the grow model and stuff, it is going to be corporatized, right? So the key thing to do is to sort of like use your common sense as a left-wing organizer to basically take out those corporatized bits, where they're talking about like you could even leave some bits in where it's saying things like, this stuff is great for people getting on in the workplace, because you just change workplace to organization, right? That's it, right? So I would say have a look at that. Have a look at the GROW model. Again, check out Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman. Again, I've not read all of it, but the bits that I have read are vastly interesting, incredibly good stuff. Highly recommend. And I've had a lot of people who have got experience in dealing with, harm exaggeration and conflict resolution recommend it to me. So there's a couple of resources to take a look at. So hopefully by the end of this episode, you're all now militant prison abolitionists who have a basic idea of why conflict happens and how you can potentially move forward with it in your organization. So that's basically the end of my presentation, Tim. What do you think? You got any thoughts?
No, I think that was great. I think that was a pretty good summary and kind of entry point for people that people that are wanting to learn more about that. I feel like it's one of those things where you can implement it on different scales, whether it's like for an organization or even just between things that's happening in your friends group, friends group, workplace, fucking org, whatever. I think it's something that everyone should look into and have at least some understanding of, because the more you learn about it, the more you'll see these things playing out. Like you'll literally see two people and they'll be accusing each other of stuff, and you'll be like, oh, hold on, okay, I think I know what's going on here, and I think I know how we can resolve this. So it's like something that I think is a pretty good skill set to, or like it's pretty good to familiarize yourself with these concepts, because there's, I think, especially in lefty circles and especially in circles of people where there are like people from marginalized groups or whatever, there does tend to be these kind of these moments. You have these big conflicts that like they'll brew and they'll fester, and like whether it's your friends group or your fucking organizing group or whatever like that, I've seen some people fully just like lose everything due to stuff like this. And and it's pretty bad. Like there's a lot of really good orgs over the years that have fallen apart just because some people had like a bad breakup or something like that, or like entire friends groups, or even like I've seen tattoo shops fall apart because someone has some like unresolved like beef with someone else that works there and stuff. So definitely
1,000%.
think that it's a great skill set, and everyone should, I think, learn at least a little bit about it. And then even just in terms of developing your own social skills, I think it's really quite necessary.
1,000%. And what I would say about like, when I was talking before about the sort of like psychological I guess, phenomena of conflict arising when, we're pattern seeking brain humans, and I'm telling everybody that you need to like smash apart that part of your brain and not like look for patterns anymore. A beautiful thing about conflict resolution is that you start to see some fascinating patterns. Like when you do the conflict resolution process with someone, it's, even if it goes bad, you can absolutely see like directly in front of your eyes, it's like, yeah, this person is responding badly to the process because of their material conditions and this, that, and the other, and rah, rah, rah. So, where there are, pattern brain behaviors to smash, there are pattern brain behaviors to be gained, which is fun. We do, in fact, have a question from the chat, which I think is really key. Forgive the pun, low-key human, who says, amazing stuff. Could this conflict resolution strategy be applied on reform voters? For those who are not in Britain, that's just fascist. that's not necessarily fascist, but like, everything from right-wing racist conservatives to fascists, basically, in the UK. I think it's a really good question because when it comes to talking about ideology, you are going to have to talk about what someone's material conditions are. It's not quite the same in terms of like, the grow process, I'm sorry to say, is a process that is something that normally takes about, several months. I would say 6 months to actually like complete. So unless you're like willing to invest that amount of time in actually speaking to someone who votes reform, might not be for you, but if you do, then it could be for you. I guess that you could apply the goals segment to like, what do you want to get out of voting reform? And then you identify what their motivating factor is, which could be stop the boats, right? In which case, like, you could turn around and say, all right, well, how realistic is this? you could use the process to be like, do you think this is realistic? Is this a realistic goal? Yada yada. Would you be happy if it didn't happen?
I mean, or the other thing is to go beyond that and be like, okay, well, so what do you believe that will achieve? Like, what do you, by stopping the boats, what do you mean by that? What is the thing that will be achieved by stopping these? And and then obviously they say some fucking brain dead shit, and then you go, well, actually the better way to address like you not having a job or whatever like that is to look at these factors and blah blah blah.
It's hard because it's like the grow process, you definitely have to just like encourage a person to come to the right conclusion on their own, kind of thing. So I wonder, again, the reform voter would have to agree to participate in the process. You're basically asking someone, can you be changed? Can your vote, if I can, convince you, would you be changed? I find that this is like a decent thing to say to friends that you might have ideological differences with, right? For example, if someone makes you feel a bit uncomfortable at work and they're a reform voter and stuff, the first question that I would say to them is, if I could give you, the right argument, would you consider changing your mind? If they say no, just forget it. It's a waste of time. Don't try and do it. You're just going to stress yourself out and other people. Then you've got to kind of like assess the situation and go, right, okay, how harmful is this person? Is this person a content creator? Are they making content to agitate people to do fascist attacks? Are they using their social media to attack people? Are they stalking people in the workplace who they think are lefty loonies or Muslims, right? I think it's a bit different. But when it comes to, I think the key thing as to why this actual question is really good is because you are going to come across people who vote in ways like that in organizations. So, for example, like I've said many times when referring to my work that I did at Great Manchester Tenants Union, I spoke about organizing in a very deprived area, one of the most deprived areas in the UK. And I came across people who were saying things like, I would vote for Bernard Manning, who is one of the most racist comedians in the history of the UK. And, I would, vote reform and stuff like this. Or like Donald Trump's got the right idea. Like when you have an inherently material conditions based organization that is not ideology focused, right, you are going to come across these kinds of people. And that can create conflict. So in that regard, absolutely, you could probably use this process to get to a point where someone reconsiders their ideology because they hadn't considered before how harmful it is by engaging in the process. So that is what I would say about that. Like, if you get two people like, oh, well, I got upset by this person because they said they were going to vote reform. And obviously I'm a Muslim person and that upsets me, etc. And then you get the reform person and they're like, well, obviously he's one of the good ones. You're going to have a whole kind of fucking like can of worms to open when you speak to that person. But you could apply this same process to them. Like, what do you want to get out of this? What do you want to get out of this? If they agree to have the conversation. So that's my answer to that. Thank you very much for the question in the chat. And I do appreciate there have been some chat contributions. We don't normally read chat on these streams, so thank you very much for the chat contributions. I know that there have been some people here who've said some very interesting things about addiction, so we do appreciate that. And sorry that we don't do the regular chat interaction that we do on streams, where we're doing our own individual stuff. But that is the end of our show for this week. And I'm glad you enjoyed it, Tim. Appreciate that.
It's good.
Glad that the chat seems to have enjoyed it as well. And I guess we are going to close off the show in the way that we regularly do, with giving people homework. I already did that. Go read Conflict is Not Abuse. Also go check out the Grow Model. And, maybe try and get in touch with some, restorative justice organizations in your area. Like you might just be able to Google one and find it and then have a chat with them and learn some stuff. So that would be the homework for this week. Now, of course, don't forget, we have a Patreon. It would be really, really good if we could get paid for the work that we do. We are, doing our best to pay Conrad for the work that he does, but are struggling in that. So please consider giving us money for the Patreon. Patreon.com/red_planet. And you could chuck us any amount of dough, but there are various different rewards, various different tiers. And at our highest tier of support, you get a thank you at the end of each show. And it goes like this. Everyone knows what I'm about to say. Thank you so much, Risk Inverse, for being our continued sicko. You legend. Really appreciate the continued support, being our sicko. Thank you so much. Please go to patreon.com/red_planet and you could be shouted out as well at the end of each show. But before we go, we want to know where we can find more Tim, more information about the hosts, your wonderful, gracious hosts. Tim, where can our listeners, viewers see more of you?
You can find more of me on YouTube and Twitch as Conquest of Dread. Not that I'm super active on either of them, but or on Twitter and Blue Sky as Dread Conquest. If you're into tabletop RPGs, also jump over to Twitter and look up Dread Dark RPG 2000, which is my little project that I've been working on, tabletop RPG that is kind of like futuristic, kind of dystopian, but with very like class war kind of themes. It's almost done. I've been working on it for ages. It's like 200 pages, like an actual book that's fully illustrated and everything. But yeah, aside from that, what if we want to find more about DJ Mule? Where can we find out more?
Well, you can, of course, find me at twitch.tv/DJMUEL every Monday to Thursday at about 6 p.m., 5 p.m. UK time till late. And I will be discussing the news in geopolitics from an anti-imperialist and a communist perspective. I think that we are going to be doing this month another overnight live stream where I basically take a look at the Makerfield by-election, which is another key by-election that is happening in the current downfall of the UK bourgeois electoral system, thanks to Keir Starmer, and it is very funny to watch. So yeah, we unlocked that last month because my wonderful chatters, my wonderful community hit the dono goal, so that's going to happen on the 18th of June, so be there for that. And yeah, I just generally cover the news. I've also got a YouTube channel. I've got a YouTube new video out, put that out a week ago, and that is literally just about Andy Burnham. If people outside of Britain want to know who this guy is, who is trying to, unseat Keir Starmer, I will tell you everything about him because he is my mayor. And, we have had a bunch of different fucking interactions with him as organizers and activists in Manchester over the years that are not really positive, mostly negative. I was about to say they could be seen as positive, but they really couldn't. You could check that out. That's on my YouTube channel. Just DJ MUEL on YouTube. And yeah, you could get all of my links at linktree.ee/DJ MUEL. Please don't forget that we have a third host who is not with us this week. It is the wonderful Sophie from Mars. You can, of course, find all of her links at linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars. She's doing some really cool writing on the Patreon at the moment, and there's some amazing videos in the works, so make sure you go and check those out. But for now, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We've been Red Planet. We will see you in the next show. Peace.